November 1941, the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Acting Reich Protector Reinhard Heydrich establishes the Theresienstadt Ghetto, which is located in the fortress town of Terezin, about 60 kilometers north of Prague. Though Jews whom the Germans deport to the ghetto think that it is a place from which they will return home after the war is over, Theresienstadt serves mainly as a transit camp for them en route to extermination camps. Of the approximately 140,000 Jews who will be transferred to Theresienstadt between November 1941 and May 1945, nearly 90,000 are deported to points further east and to almost certain death. Roughly 33,000 of them die in Theresienstadt itself, mostly from malnutrition and disease. Approximately 90% out of 15,000 children who pass through Theresienstadt perish in killing centers, primarily Auschwitz. The first commandant of the Theresienstadt Ghetto becomes Siegfried Seidl. Siegfried Seidl was born on the 24th of August 1911 in Tulln on the Danube, then part of Austria-Hungary. After completing his secondary education, Seidl began pursuing a law degree, but for financial reasons he interrupted his studies after 3 semesters, and then took on various odd jobs. In October 1930, Seidl joined the Nazi Party, and in September 1931, he became a member of the Sturmabteilung, also known as the SA, which was the Nazi paramilitary force also known as the Stormtroopers or the Brown Shirts, for the color of their uniform. In May 1932, Seidl joined the SS as staff sergeant and was assigned to the 11th SS Regiment based in Austria. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, and he fully intended to bring about an Austro-German union. However, Germany was not immediately militarily and diplomatically ready to carry out Hitler's foreign policy goals. First, Hitler and other Nazi leaders focused on establishing a Nazi dictatorship. However, behind the scenes, the Nazi leadership began planning territorial expansion and a European war almost as soon as they took power. From 1935 until 1938, Seidl studied history and German studies at the University of Vienna, where in 1941 he obtained his doctorate degree. Years later, however, after he was convicted as a war criminal, this title was taken away from him. The first act of territorial expansion committed by Nazi Germany was the annexation of the neighboring country of Austria into the German Reich, also known as the Anschluss. This event took place over 3 days, between the 11th and 13th of March, 1938. Seidl had a Jewish uncle who was a choir master and later owned a stamp shop, and with whom he maintained contact. After the annexation of Austria, his uncle never returned from Czechoslovakia, where he was traveling on business. His wife, Seidl's aunt, officially divorced him in 1939. In March of the same year, Seidl married a former kindergarten teacher, Elisabeth Stieber, who was also a dedicated member of the Nazi Party and supporting member of the SS. The marriage produced 3 children. In September 1938, German Chancellor Adolf Hitler threatened to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland, a border area of Czechoslovakia on which the ethnic German population lived, was ceded to Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy and Germany held a conference in Munich between the 29th and 30th of September 1938 and agreed to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. To this conference, which was also known as the Munich Betrayal, the Czechoslovaks were not even invited. Less than 6 months later, on the 15th of March 1939, in flagrant violation of the Munich Agreement, Nazi Germany invaded and occupied the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. Adolf Hitler himself arrived in Prague, and on the 16th of March 1939, by a proclamation from Prague Castle, established the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. In late 1939, Seidl was called into the police because of his SS membership. In January 1940, he was transferred to the Vienna Central Office for Jewish Emigration and traveled to the Reich Security Main Office in Berlin, where he had to report to SS Colonel Adolf Eichmann, one of the major organizers of the Holocaust. Later that year, he was sent to Poznan, in German-occupied Poland, where he was responsible for the resettlement of Poles and Jews from the newly annexed territories of the Third Reich. In October 1941, Seidl was instructed by Eichmann to set up the Theresienstadt Ghetto, which was supposed to serve mainly as a transit camp for Jews en route to extermination camps. It was also presented by the Nazis as a model Jewish settlement for propaganda purposes. When Seidl arrived in Theresienstadt, he emphasized the importance of being addressed as Mr. Camp Commandant. According to eyewitnesses, he was a handsome and elegant young man who loved music and was an enthusiastic philatelist. Seidl enjoyed discussing military matters with his subordinates, including strategy and tactics. Together with his family, he lived in a 3-bedroom apartment at a nearby hotel and owned a riding horse, sports car, Mercedes company car, and enjoyed going hunting. In Theresienstadt, Seidl had a staff of 54 Aryans at his disposal, only 10 or 11 of whom were members of the SS, the rest were civilians. Although he was married and had children, he maintained a relationship with a mistress named Elisabeth Schul, who worked at the Theresienstadt telephone switchboard. Seidl had significant control over the preparation of the first camp regulations. He could approve or reject the verdicts passed by the camp's arbitration court and imposed punishments if he caught people smoking or reading a book during working hours. He enforced prison sentences and even caning. Seidl was revengeful, and among other things, he also settled personal scores. On one occasion, he had a prisoner named Arthur Müller, who arrived in Theresienstadt on the 13th transport from Vienna, beaten so severely that he died a few days later. Müller's offense was that he had played a role in the sale of his parents' mill. Seidl imposed not only individual, but also collective punishments, and on many occasions, he would ban lighting or heating, which had a particularly tragic effect on the old and sick prisoners. On his orders, people over the age of 70 would be put on cleaning duty, and if someone misbehaved, they were either tortured or put on the next transport to the east. In December 1941, Seidl had ordered that Jews were forbidden to shop in Aryan shops, all tobacco had to be handed in, and people in uniform had to be saluted. Violations of these rules were punished with 10 strokes of the cane. Seidl gave the members of the SS under his command a free hand in terrorizing the Jews. When the wagon driver named Cherba, employed by the commandant's office, shot a Jew in the ghetto's lumberyard during an argument, there was no investigation of the incident. Seidl was often present at the arrival of transport in Theresienstadt, and often used a whip or cane to force the prisoners to move faster. Once, Seidl beat the blind invalid war veteran named Oskar Löwy with a riding whip and punched him in the face so hard that his prosthetic eye broke. The only reason he beat him was that Oskar had asked him about the possibility of storing his luggage in the locker. During his time in Theresienstadt, Eichmann instructed Seidl to hang 16 Jews for trying to smuggle a letter to the outside world, and Seidl fulfilled the order. When thousands of old people died in the ghetto in autumn 1942, Seidl commented on this with the words, "The clock is ticking correctly." Under Seidl's command, 121,083 people were deported to Theresienstadt, of which around 25,000 died there, and almost 44,000 people were deported further to the east, where most of them were murdered. In July 1943, Seidl was transferred to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where he was appointed camp inspector. At the time of his arrival, there were around 400 prisoners in the camp, which was still under construction. Seidl was particularly responsible for the Jews from South America and Spain, who were eligible for exchange and were given preferential treatment. During this time, Seidl was believed to have torn up these prisoners' personal documents and placed a number of prisoners on Auschwitz lists. In March 1944, Seidl traveled to Budapest, where he joined the 5th Einsatzgruppe SS paramilitary death squad. He was then transferred to Debrecen, the 3rd largest city in Hungary, where he helped confiscate Jewish assets and prepare Jewish deportations to the east. In May 1944, the Hungarian authorities, in coordination with the German security police, began to systematically deport the Hungarian Jews. Adolf Eichmann was chief of the team of deportation experts that worked with the Hungarian authorities. The Hungarian police carried out the roundups and forced the Jews onto deportation trains. In less than 2 months, from the 15th of May to the 9th of July, 1944, nearly 440,000 Jews were deported from Hungary in more than 145 trains. Most were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where upon arrival, and after selection on a rail ramp, about 80% of deportees were gassed. Crematoria were unable to cope with the number of corpses, firing pits were dug where bodies were burned. In light of the worsening military situation, and facing threats from Allied leaders of war crimes trials, Hungarian Admiral Miklos Horthy ordered a halt to the deportations on the 7th of July 1944, and by the time they had stopped 2 days later, almost the entire community of Jews in the Hungarian countryside had died. By the end of July 1944, the only Jewish community left in Hungary was that of Budapest, the capital. In July 1944, when the deportation of the Jews of Hungary was finished, Seidl was appointed as acting leader of the SS Special Deployment Command, Outpost Vienna. There, he exercised control over the remaining Hungarian Jews in forced labor camps, which had been built in Vienna and Lower Austria. World War II in Europe ended on the 8th of May 1945. After the war, Seidl attempted to hide in Austria, but he was soon arrested by local police, and in July 1945 handed over to the American occupation forces. Czechoslovakia requested Seidl's extradition, but Austrian officials refused, explaining that many of Seidl's victims had been Austrian Jews. In October 1946, Seidl was tried by the Austrian People's Court and found guilty of high treason and crimes against humanity during his time at the Theresienstadt Ghetto. At first, Seidl did not want to testify and only claimed he had to obey orders. Later, however, he broke his silence and confessed his part in the atrocities. Seidl was sentenced to death and was ordered to forfeit all his property. After hearing the verdict, he calmly bowed, but he turned pale and started trembling. His wife and mother petitioned the president for clemency, saying he had 3 children, but the petition was rejected. Right before the execution, as the noose was placed around his neck, Seidl told his executioner he was not sorry for the Jews he had killed and that he had nothing to regret. Siegfried Seidl was 35 years old when he was hanged on the 4th of February 1947 in Vienna. There were no tears shed for Siegfried Seidl.
Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.